I want to start with a detail that most people will miss because it does not look dramatic: dollar swaps, not missiles, not ships, not sanctions, not another speech about strength. Dollar swaps, that is the quiet mechanism that tells you when the financial system is getting nervous. A dollar swap is a way for a foreign central bank to get access to dollars without going into the open market. Under stress, it is plumbing, it is technical, it is not supposed to be the headline, but in this Iran crisis, the plumbing may be the real headline. Because if the Gulf states are asking for larger and faster access to dollars, it means one thing: somebody is worried about a dollar shortage. And that changes the whole meaning of this war. The public story is that America is applying economic pressure on Iran. Sanctions, blockades, oil restrictions, port pressure. The goal is to strangle Iran's revenue and force Tehran to accept terms. But economic pressure does not travel in a straight line. It moves through systems, it moves through oil flows, dollar debts, treasury markets, stock markets, interest rates, and political confidence. The United States may aim the weapon at Iran, but the pressure does not stop at Iran. It travels back through the petrodollar system. That is the real story. For decades, the bargain was simple. Gulf states sold oil and gas. They received dollars. Those dollars paid debts, bought imports, financed investments, and flowed back into American assets: treasuries, stocks, banks, real estate. The oil left the Gulf. Dollars entered the Gulf. A large part of those dollars returned to the United States. That loop helped support American power. Oil priced in dollars created global demand for dollars. Global demand for dollars supported the Treasury market. The Treasury market allowed the American state to borrow cheaply. Cheap borrowing financed deficits, military power, and the comfortable assumption that the world would keep absorbing American debt. That is not just economics. That is empire in financial form. Now, look at what happens when Hormuz is disrupted. Oil exports slow, dollar income becomes uncertain, but dollar obligations remain. Debt still needs servicing, interest still needs paying, contracts still come due. A tanker trapped in the Gulf does not suspend a bond payment in New York. So if the dollars are not arriving from oil, the Gulf states need dollars from somewhere else. One option is a swap line. The United States provides liquidity and the system calms down. The other option is asset sales. They sell treasuries, they sell stocks, they sell dollar assets to raise dollars. That is the danger Washington cannot ignore. If Gulf states sell treasuries in size, treasury prices fall and yields rise. When yields rise, interest rates rise across the system. Mortgage rates, corporate borrowing, government interest costs, consumer credit, market valuations, everything feels it. And this is not a good moment for higher rates. America is already carrying enormous debt. The government is already running large deficits. The economy is already politically fragile. Affordability is already a public anger point. A spike in rates would not be a small technical event, it would be a political event. This is why the dollar swap issue is so revealing. It shows that the Iran war is not only a military or diplomatic crisis, it is a test of the petrodollar recycling machine. If the Gulf cannot sell oil normally, it cannot receive dollars normally. If it cannot receive dollars normally, it must either borrow dollars, swap for dollars, or sell assets for dollars. And if it sells the wrong assets at the wrong time, the pressure reaches Washington. That is how a regional war becomes a treasury risk. This is also the contradiction inside economic war. The United States uses the dollar system as a weapon because the dollar system is powerful, but the same system creates dependency. America needs foreigners to hold dollars. It needs them to buy treasuries. It needs them to trust American markets. It needs the recycling process to continue. You cannot weaponize a system forever and assume everyone will keep depending on it in the old way. You cannot disrupt oil flows and assume dollar flows remain unchanged. You cannot pressure Iran through the Gulf and assume Gulf balance sheets are unaffected. The system is connected. That connection is now visible, and once it is visible, people start asking dangerous questions. Do we want all our trade exposed to the dollar system? Do we want all our reserves tied to American decisions? Do we want to borrow in dollars if dollar access can become political? Do we want to keep buying treasuries if the next shock may force us to sell them? Those are the questions that weaken empires slowly. not because one country suddenly defeats the empire, because the world begins hedging against it. That is why the petrodollar story matters. The petrodollar does not die in a single day. It erodes. It erodes when oil exporters question the old recycling loop. It erodes when importers seek non-dollar settlement. It erodes when sanctioned countries build workarounds. It erodes when central banks hold more gold. It erodes when China, Russia, Iran, and others decide that dollar dependence is not merely convenient but dangerous. The dollar is still powerful, the Treasury market is still central, the United States still matters enormously, but the direction has changed. The world is no longer assuming the dollar is the only possible center. More countries are asking for alternatives, not because alternatives are easy, but because dependence has a cost. Iran accepting payments outside the dollar is part of that. China and Russia building channels around sanctions is part of that. BRICS becoming a symbol of monetary alternatives is part of that. Gulf states needing emergency dollar access is part of that. Each piece looks separate together. They show the old system under stress. That is why calling this economic fury misses the deeper point. Fury sounds like strength. It sounds like America is hitting Iran with overwhelming financial force. But if the same crisis forces Washington to provide emergency dollar support to prevent Gulf asset sales, then the fury is not only outward, some of it is coming back through the pipes, through oil, through debt, through swaps, through treasuries, through interest rates. That is the boomerang, and it matters politically. Trump can declare victory. He can find a dramatic image, a seizure, a strike, a flag, a speech, and tell people America won. Many people will want to believe that. Nations like victory stories, voters like simple endings, but bond markets do not care about victory stories. They care about liquidity, risk, supply, and demand. If yields rise, the story changes. If stocks fall, the story changes. If affordability gets worse, the story changes. If jobs weaken while prices stay high, the story changes. Most people may not follow dollar swaps or treasury auctions, but they feel mortgage rates, rent, groceries, fuel, and fear about employment. That is how foreign policy comes home. A war sold as strength abroad becomes pressure at the kitchen table. This is why Washington cannot afford a Gulf Treasury sell-off. It cannot afford to let dollar liquidity become a panic. It cannot afford a sharp rise in rates. At the same time, the political base is already divided over war, inflation, jobs, and broken promises. So what is likely to happen? America will provide the swaps. It will give the Gulf states the dollars they need. It will do what it must to prevent forced selling of treasuries and American equities. The official language will be confidence. The real work will be containment. Contain the rate spike. Contain the market reaction. Contain the dollar shortage. Contain the political damage. Contain the contradiction between military pressure abroad and financial fragility at home. That is not victory. That is damage control. And damage control is one of the clearest signs of a system under strain. Decline does not mean collapse tomorrow. It does not mean America is finished. It does not mean the dollar is dead. That kind of thinking is too simple. Decline means the cost of maintaining the system rises. It means the same tools still exist, but they work less cleanly. Sanctions still hurt, but they create workarounds. Military pressure still frightens, but it creates wider instability. The dollar still dominates, but more countries hedge against it. That is where America is now. Still powerful, still central, still dangerous, but less insulated from the consequences of its own actions. The Iran war exposes that the United States can hurt Iran. Of course it can, but can it hurt Iran without hurting the dollar system? Can it blockade ports without stressing Gulf liquidity? Can it weaponize finance without accelerating the search for alternatives? Can it push oil pressure into the global system without triggering treasury risk? That is the question. And it is a much bigger question than Iran. A competent empire believes its tools are permanent. A declining empire discovers that every use of its tools teaches others how to live without them. Every sanctions campaign teaches workarounds. Every asset freeze teaches reserve diversification. Every oil shock teaches settlement alternatives. Every emergency swap line teaches that the center is not as stable as it claims. This is how the world changes. One hedge at a time, one non-dollar contract at a time, one gold purchase at a time, one central bank decision at a time, one crisis that makes governments ask whether dependence on the dollar is still worth the risk. The petrodollar system was a masterpiece of American power because it made the world organize itself around the dollar voluntarily. But voluntary systems require trust. If the system is used too often as a weapon, trust weakens. If energy routes become unstable, trust weakens. If dollar access becomes a crisis, trust weakens. The old loop still exists, but it no longer feels automatic. That is the key. The United States may manage this crisis. It may provide swaps, calm the Gulf, stabilize the market, and declare victory. But even if it survives this round, the lesson remains. The rest of the world has seen the weakness. It has seen that a war in the Gulf can become a dollar liquidity problem. It has seen that the petrodollar system can be pressured from the inside. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The dollar still matters. The petrodollar still matters. America still matters. But the belief that the world has no alternative is weaker than it used to be. That belief was the real empire. And that is what is beginning to unravel.